Record.
Right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Appointments, recognitions, and resignations. Request appointment of Christopher Baker as full-time firefighter EMT at an initial base rate of $26.75 to be increased to $28.24 upon successful completion of a 6-month probationary period, effective date of February 16, 2023.
Move appointment.
Second.
All in favor? Right. Selectmen's reports. Any reports?
I have something. I would like to request a revote on something we voted on at our last meeting. I realized that I should have abstained. That was the vote to give $1,000 to the Maine Lobstermen's Association. I'm a member.
Oh.
And I didn't even occur to me. I'm totally in favor of it, but I shouldn't have voted. So can we vote that again?
Sure, what do we vote? $1,000?
Yeah.
Okay, motion. First of all, we have to amend, right?
Right.
Okay, so I need a motion to amend.
So moved.
I wasn't at the meeting, so I can't.
Yeah.
So second,
Second.
okay, all in favor? Okay, so the motion is on the floor to amend the
Previous vote.
the previous vote to exclude Martha. Okay, the item is $1,000 to be given to the
Legal Defense Fund.
legal defense fund for the MLA. Motion,
Move approval. Second.
all in favor? Great.
One
And one
abstention.
abstention, okay. Okay, any more selectmen's reports? No? Okay, new business, proposed land use zoning ordinance articles.
We're ready.
I got it.
There we go. All right, so thank you for the opportunity to review the proposed land use ordinance amendments. Warrant articles for this year's town meeting. There are 10 possible warrant articles that you have in front of you, and then one which I'll talk about at the end. Just getting language from the state on, so we can talk about that at the end. Nobody's reviewed it yet, and that's the last minute additions. So we'll go with that. I have a list, so I'm just going to go through my list, if that's all right with you, unless you have a particular order you want to go through them. And if you want, I can just explain it and then pause for questions. And we'll go.
Sounds good.
Okay. So the first one is a proposed warrant article that would extend the deadline for establishing uses once a conditional use is approved by the planning board. Currently, it's 12 months. The extension would make it 24 months. And the thinking behind that change is that it does take quite a while to really get going on something sometimes, particularly in this plant environment. And the committee wanted to give people a little more time. This has also been reviewed and approved by the planning board. Good questions. Let me just keep going through.
Yeah.
The next one is a proposed warrant article to.
Could you give us the article number, please? Too?
I don't have article numbers. Unfortunately.
Wait, well,
They're in order. We have a different order than we do.
You want to tell me what your next one is and follow along, and I'll tell you what it is.
The first one on our list is to clarify that the minimum lot size of 1,000 square feet only applies to lots within the village of Northeast Harbor.
Yes, so that is a proposed warrant article that would basically clarify that there's a provision in the ordinance that currently allows the minimum lot size on lots that are in a village commercial zoning district that are served by water and sewer to have 1,000 square foot minimum lot size. When that warrant article was created, the intention was for really to be focused in the village of Northeast Harbor. There are other village commercial districts in the town. So this basically just clarifies that where it's really only applicable here, which was the intent when it was created.
Okay.
That one looks like its own change.
Yeah, that's the tax map 26 and 27.
So we have had, actually right toward the end of last town meeting round, when it was too late to add anything, we got some letters from the first two property owners requesting a zone change to change from a shoreland, residential to a residential 2 zoning district. And both of those lots are outside the 250 shoreland zone. It's been reviewed by the land use committee and also reviewed and approved by the planning board.
Dimensional standards for a duplex.
So this is a proposed warrant article that would clarify that currently in the ordinance right now, and it's been in existence for since I can remember, there are 1 family and 2 family structures count, and there's a provision in the ordinance that says if you have a 1 family unit, all the dimensional standards apply. If you have a 2 family unit, all the dimensional standards apply. So if you add an additional 2 family or 1 family, you have to meet the dimensional standards ×2. This just clarifies that that does apply for a duplex, because a duplex is like a single structure. So these dimensional standards really apply for the structure, not the number of units in the structure for those 2 categories. So it's, again, a lot of these are clarifications for the ordinance that are not, these are not new policies. This is a clarification of what is currently and has been for many, many years interpreted in the ordinance. Okay.
Storage buildings is next.
Storage buildings, so this is a newer one. Currently, if one wanted to, so I'd say I bought a lot on Long Pond and I couldn't afford to build anything else except for a shed or a garage to put my kayak in or my canoe or whatever. You can't do that in today's ordinance without it being associated with like a residential development, like a structure. So you have to build a house and then have that structure be accessory to the house. This change would allow somebody to build, well, I think we're calling it a residential storage structure / yeah. So we're adding use to the residential column that would allow somebody to go in and build a shed or a barn, not a barn per se, but a garage, some storage building, or other building in their property without it being strictly considered an accessory use to something else.
Is there a call for that?
Yes.
Mhm.
We have had, that's the reason we figured it out. Yeah, there have been people who have wanted to put stuff up without having to build a whole new house. To do that.
Can I ask a question, Tracy Aberman?
Go
Given the shortage of housing, how would you plan on monitoring that people don't have all their kids staying in those sheds? I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but you know, a lot of people have said, I'll just build a shed in my backyard and I'll sleep there in the summer, you know, and how do you control that?
I think you control it the same way that you control other uses that aren't intended for the things that you allow, which is oftentimes you get a complaint to the code enforcement officer investigates that use, and then it becomes a violation if indeed it is a violation. I think the point of the change is really to kind of fall in line with what the directive that we've been given quite a few years ago, which is to, you know, try to find ways to make the land use ordinance more clear, more straightforward, more usable to the town. What's the next one?
Air
landing site.
Air landing sites. So this provision is actually, again, another sort of housekeeping measure. Air landing sites are not currently allowed in the allowed uses table. There's a provision in section 6 of the land use ordinance that references air landing sites in terms of the types of standards. It's in the standards section. So we propose to delete it because you can't do it anyway. And we're just rather than like renumber the whole ordinance section because it's early in the numbering, I just put reserved next to it in case we want to add another standard in its place later without having to renumber that. Part of that was more, probably more editing on my part, but
So there is a place for a plane to land in this town or no? Nowhere.
it's not allowed. I mean, if there is one, then it would be a grandfathered use
Mhm.
because it's not allowed under the allowed uses table right now. So that every time like the planning board has to go through their checklist when they're reviewing an application, there's never a time where that's gonna be. We don't have that as a use that would become.
Speaking of light flight,
That's a different,
that's a different payment. Yeah, okay.
How about
Thank you.
Selms Pond? I mean, you've got some seaplanes that,
on the pond, I'm not sure would apply to the land use part, but Kim, I have a
No,
different.
'cause
opinion
it's-
on what
State owns
states-
that.
Yeah.
Good question.
right,
Who would have jurisdiction, Harbor Master?
That's a
Coast
great-
Guard.
I don't know.
The Coast Guard's in charge of law of great funds.
They are.
Yeah, I looked into it once, not right.
I have a question. It's Donna on Zoom. I have a question. We also have seaplanes landing on Somes Sound. Would it pertain to them as well?
It's a similar response, Donna. I think that it doesn't apply to this part of the land use ordinance. This would be if I were to go and want to build an air landing strip on my property somewhere on land.
we don't have jurisdiction over the sound anyway.
Okay. And then my next question is this also helicopter pads as well as airplane landing strips, or are they separate?
I think they might be separate. I'm gonna double check on that one, though, Donna. That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you, because I think we're more likely to see someone putting a helipad in their property rather than a, although anything could happen.
I do think you'd want to add different standards to the ordinance if that were to start to become a case. So I would recommend that, if people start to come forward before the town to say, we want to start putting helipads all over the place, then we'd want to think that one through a little bit more than what's in the ordinance now, rather than not take it out. I want to add something different, just to reflect on that.
Okay,
Also, just a pause, the standards in that section aren't very good anyway, so that would be a whole nother.
So you're saying it is okay to have a helipad? I'm a little bit confused, sorry.
Saying, I think that it would be okay, if you were doing it for like emergency purposes, or if you're landing at like the school because it's a life flight scenario or something like that. What I would say is if the town is going to allow helipads for like in my backyard, so I can go from here to there, then I think you would want to have a different set of standards than what's in the ordinance now. So I wouldn't not take this out. I would still take this out and then add a standard specifically for that.
If somebody has that.
Needed to. So that would be like a
So if somebody
24.
came to the town now, the way it stands with a helicopter and said we want to land, what our answer would be, we don't have provision for that.
Yes, I believe that's true.
But we'll make one.
We can try. We can explore how. What's
They
the
can just launch up their yacht.
Yeah.
With that,
They can just launch up their yacht.
or their roof.
all right.
What was next?
Harbor Master.
Moorings.
So this is a proposed, it's really more of a clarification of the standards of, what an expansion of use is. So in this change, there's two things that we've done. One is to clarify that if you add moorings to something, you're not actually expanding the use to a nonconformity. You're not expanding the use. And partially that's because the moorings are actually not a land use issue, they're a harbor master issue, so you're not adding. Yeah, it's not an expansion of use to add moorings, and to clarify that moorings are actually administered by the harbor master and not the planning board.
And the next one you already talked about, the 12 to 24 months.
Well, 24 months, yep, that was the first one.
And then
Housekeeping correction to date.
Yeah, So this one is clarifying the that section in the ordinance 6B11, which deals with access to lots. A year or two ago, we had a change that clarified, that allowed different access standards depending on how old the lot is. There should have, the lot date, the creation date should have been the date that we're changing it to, rather than the date that was in the meeting, because there was an extended town meeting, I think, that year, and we picked the latter date as opposed to the first date. This actually makes it more consistent with what should have been voted on during those changes.
And road setback.
Road setback in that one article basically clarifies where road setbacks are measured from. So public roads and private roads have different setbacks. Where you measure from is the same. It's on the edge of the travel way or from the edge of the right of way if there's no travel.
Okay.
We have another housekeeping change.
Footprint within the shoreline zone.
Yeah.
So this is to make that provision of the ordinance more consistent with state shoreline zoning, which I think changed several years ago. We haven't usually like to try to, wait for a little while to do a bunch of shoreline zoning changes, but sometimes also piece them in. This was pointed out a year or two ago, and the footprint limit should be 20% and not 50%, but it's just consistency with state rules. Pretty much it.
No, yeah, I guess it is.
right.
So the last one, just to point out that I alluded to earlier, that we're considering is the state law just changed to amend the language of which you measure height in an area that's in the shoreline zone and in a floodplain, which allows a little more flexibility, because sometimes the floodplain standards and the shoreline zoning standards kind of conflict in terms of height restrictions. And if you have to raise your structure up a little bit in order to meet the floodplain standards, you're also oftentimes like sort of constrained by shoreline zoning height restrictions. The state law, which is currently in effect, actually allows for a slightly different, there's a little more flexibility to meet the standards, and we've got just that language from the state last week, and so we can draft something up just to be more consistent with that, which is apparently already in effect and would already apply, but we'd like to try to get it in ordinance so it's just clear.
Makes sense.
Just would have helped with the Dodge Point Road building, the town building. That was
Oh,
different.
that's right.
It's almost got a flat roof now because of the elevation that we had to bring the floor level up to for the base flood elevation of the floodplain. So we had to bring it up and then we had to lower the roof.
Yeah. Your base flood is.
I remember that.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all about that. In the original grade, it's where you measure, how you measure all that.
One guy with the helicopter is gonna have.
That could be a really good change. We have a public hearing at the planning board
All right.
on the 22nd. So there's a possibility we could get it in. Until Thursday. One more?
You just give them to me, I'll figure out how to get in there.
So that's the last loser. There's a warrant committee meeting coming up, and I believe that's
Those days.
28th. And the planning board's already reviewed all those and agreed to them.
Yeah, we meet on the 27th. 21st and 27th.
That's right.
You guys don't actually make the recommendations on
Right.
it. I guess it's just more for your information.
You want to jump to short-term rentals?
Oh, so much.
Welcome to my world. Okay. Well, what you have before you right now is a draft, which is a clean version, an updated version from the last Luso committee meeting that we had at the beginning of, or the January meeting.
Oh, sorry.
And we've had a conversation with the town attorney since then to clarify a few other things. There are one or two sections in here which I still need to like iron out with them, including this section on number 3, validity and severability. That part is the lawyers were thinking that we might want to make if something is held inconsistent, then really the whole ordinance should be inconsistent rather than having provisions of this ordinance. So sometimes that provision is really helpful. Sometimes it's not. I just wasn't quite sure how to write it, and they never sent me some edits to make it what they wanted to say. So I need to get back to them with that and a few other things. But fundamentally, this is the same ordinance that we polished up through several Luso committee meetings, feedback from multiple different people. We do have a hearing on this next week on the 21st. And what this ordinance does, I think we've talked about before, but it's basically a licensing ordinance, which kind of sets the framework for the town to be able to get licenses for people who want to do short-term rentals and try to track and understand where and how many there are in what parts of the town. It also provides some safety standards, parking. And they're really more good neighbor standards as well. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, things that are already required, but we want to put in the ordinance. So it's a simple ordinance for the most part. It may not go as far as some people want and probably goes farther than some people want, but I think based on the comments that we've had, what we're trying to do, I believe, is come up with kind of a balanced structure that is something that we can put before this group. I will say, like one of the things that we haven't discussed a lot as a committee, and I think it's kind of board feedback, is administration of the ordinance. And so that's a really important thing to think about. How is this going to be administered? We've written it in a way that basically says, the town will, or the Board of Selectmen will. And I think you guys need to just, spend a little bit of time thinking about, okay, how do we want to allocate, resources? I know we really were sensitive to trying to put more in the code enforcement officer's lap, because that's already a lot going on. And there's different things that the administration entails. You have to receive the applications, you have to process the applications, you have to collect the fees, you have to renew the applications. Then there's the complaints part, and then I think it's a fairly straightforward, if you get a lot of complaints, then the board is the decider about whether or not a license gets revoked. And then there's a process for that as well, which is absolutely simplified.
Hey, John, may I ask a question?
Yes.
So who is the town attorney advising you?
That's Eaton Peabody.
Did you hear that, Lee?
Yeah, that's the same law firm, just for the record, that's the same law firm which represents Ocean Properties in Bar Harbor, which has 74 registrations for short-term rentals in that town, right next door. So I guess being next door, it's not a conflict in Mount Desert.
Different.
Just anyway, duly noted. I want to ask you about the language here. Do you mind? May I
Go
have-
ahead.
In the purpose, it says there are legitimate concerns about the increase in number of short-term rentals and the undue impacts they can have on the quality of life and quiet enjoyment of properties within the vicinity of short-term rentals. During some of your meetings, it was raised that also concerns about whether short-term rentals and its impact on the housing stock in the town and its impact on year-round homes as a percentage of the housing stock. This ordinance doesn't deal with that at all, right? This is a fairly narrow process here. you're only dealing with what you call quality of life, and I don't even know what that means, and quiet enjoyment of properties. You're not dealing with short-term rental impact on the housing stock.
I'm trying to think about how to answer your question, Lincoln.
But that was raised in some of the meetings, but it's not here. That issue was raised.
Jeff?
I'd kind of like to echo that a little bit. It seems to me that we did hear from some residents that were concerned about short-term rentals in their vicinity. And while this does some things to stem that, potentially people that were violating whatever standards are set, it seems to me that the people in this town are far more concerned about properties disappearing from the ownership of people who live in them. And I don't see this, and I'm not suggesting we can rewrite everything, but it does seem to me that those are the two primary concerns. The disappearing of housing stock, as Lincoln described it, where houses are being bought by people who have no intention of living in them. That is the biggest problem we face. And the secondary problem is the people who buy these houses with no intention of living in them, renting them to people that they really don't care how they behave while they're there. They're two really very different things, but it's, you know, it feels very much like if we pass this as it is, many, many more homes will disappear from people who are going to live in them. We have a school system with a declining population. That's not going to end if we do that. There's a certain percentage of it. Anyway, I'm not going to get down that road because I thought we were going to hear from them today. But those to me, I would agree 100% with the lack of attention to the disappearing of homes from the ownership of people that are going to live in them.
Or rent them year round.
Basically, or rent them year round. And I mean, it seems to me that's the biggest problem when you have empty homes in the winter and we have empty schools and we have neighborhoods that have no lights on. That's a bigger issue. And this doesn't really address that, as was pointed out. That's all.
My other question is, how can you go to a public hearing without knowing what you're going to charge for the license, what that process is, how much is it going to cost the town? Are you going to have to budget for it? Is it going to require extra? Is it going to require the code enforcement officers staff up? How many are we talking about? There's no. How do you go to a public hearing when none of that is stated in here? I mean, as a taxpayer, I'd like to know if this is going to cost me money.
Sure. Well, I think that number one, that's one of the issues that we're here to discuss tonight. How the board feels about the administration. So that's something that the board really needs to decide. We did do some research to give to Derlin about the different other entities that do administration for loans. Fairly common, number one. Number two, a lot of ordinances that you have in this town and other towns don't have the fee structure in the ordinance because it gives the Board of Selectmen the ability to create the fee structure and not have to change the ordinance every time you change the fee. That's the way a lot of ordinances are set up. So we have gone to multiple public hearings without fees associated with things. I think the purpose of next week's public hearing is to have a different level of conversation.
Right.
Then we've had the ordinance committee meetings and have people come and provide their feedback. This doesn't need to be a baked-in ordinance right now. We are trying to create and we've made edits all the way through this process. So we're trying to make it as good of an ordinance as we can make it for the town to consider. And it's really up to you guys to decide whether or not this is the version you want to put forward or not. This isn't a planning board matter that they approve. So we're just going to continuing to put this through. And before I stop talking, I do want to say that no, this is not gonna be the silver bullet to deal with the issues that you're talking about. There are a lot of reasons why the town is suffering from a lack of year-round housing. There are a lot of strategies that need to be thought through to help solve that problem. It's a huge crisis on the island. I'm fully aware of that crisis and heavily involved in a lot of different things that are trying to bring solutions to the table. And this structure is it's only the
Yeah.
framework by which you can understand how this one particular thing might affect affordability or year-round housing or availability of housing. It's the starting point. And I think there's a policy choice that you need to make about whether, how far do you want to go as a board, or how far do you want to go as
Further.
a town to put something in front of them, to put something in front of the voters that either is or isn't going to get approved. So this provides a framework for you to do a lot of different things in the future, but it's just the starting point. These are the directions that I was given as the consultant.
Could I ask another, just a language question? I mean, it seems pretty clear that the majority of people agree that owner occupied properties are a completely different animal. And it says specifically that that in applicability in D, that hosted homes stay exempt, which is, but then what I wonder about is in the definition for short-term rental, it says in whole or in part, a dwelling unit offered in whole or in part will be required to have a license, and then it says in 5A, license required, no short-term rental shall be advertised, rented, or operated. I just, that seems a little bit ambiguous, as far as our owner occupied rental units, exempt from all of this.
Yes.
Okay, I guess I just would make sure that before, because you'll get into a big to-do over people that don't quite understand that. So even in the short-term rental definition, I would suggest adding in parentheses, excluding owner occupied. Just because when I read that, it doesn't really make it clear. It says in whole or in part, meaning, I guess I could not live in my house, but only rent half of it. And that would not be an owner occupied.
So
You know what I'm saying?
clarify, yeah, because there's a provision on that page called hosted homestay.
Yeah, I saw that.
And a hosted homestay is what you're talking about.
Right.
And so in the definition of short-term rental, it does exclude hosted homestays.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's a really, really good point. So there are a few things that we also, I think there's some really good comments that we got from the public regarding like what happens if, I only rent it out for like 2 weeks out of an entire year. Is that
That's excluded.
that's excluded? Or what happens if I just have a house or my place that I just want to let my family come and stay at, but I'm not charging? Those are not short-term. So there's things that are definitely excluded.
In addition to that, the hosted home qualifies, like, for instance, provided that people are within the code to, if they've had a garage with an apartment, but they live in the house, that's their host, because they're on the property.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify.
Can I say something here too? Tracy Aberman again.
Go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, I have actually a couple of things to say, but I want to just respond to that. It's been sort of something that we've always done in Northeast Harbor, that people rent their house and they go live in their camp for the summer. That would not be considered a hosted homestay, but that's something that's been going on for 50 years where, I rented a little house like that from the town plumbers 30 years ago, and they just went to camp for the summer and rented, for $700 a week. Even back 30 years ago, it was, outrageous pricing, and that's how they paid their taxes and their mortgage. And that was just part of our fabric. That is not covered in this. And that's a big loss, but I feel like this whole thing is a huge overreach, and that really what we're talking about here, if we're talking about quality of life, is a parking ordinance and a noise ordinance. The noise ordinance covers a lot of what these quality of life issues are, being labeled as. And a police department, which we now share with Bar Harbor, could be answering noise ordinance issues instead of having to have Kim Keen answer every single ordinance thing. But I just feel like this is pushing into the privacy of how people use their houses. And I will be exempt from this. I have a little cabin that I've built to live in. I can rent my farmhouse and be considered someone who lives on their property. But I really feel like you guys are asking to kind of pry into people's financial lives to find out who is sort of able to qualify for paying their mortgage and paying their taxes to exist in this town. And, you know, I understand that there is a housing shortage here, but you're almost penalizing the people who actually did figure out a way to afford a house on this island. And saying like, now we're gonna ask you to redo your carbon monoxide. We did all this with Kim already. We already went through all of the things that are in this ordinance, except for parking and the noise ordinance. And this town needs a noise ordinance, period, because we have construction all the time. There's no rules about when people can start blasting. You know, we need this. And we're, you know, you guys want to keep talking about growing the town. And we don't even have something as simple as you can't blast granite outside my bedroom window at 7 a.m. But that could easily include you can't party outside my window at 12 a.m. I just feel like, and I'm going to speak at every single meeting about this because I feel really strongly about this. You have no fees. You have no idea who's going to be running this thing. Bar Harbor, Lincoln Milstein just published an article saying that, you know, Bar Harbor has found that their licensing ordinance was not a success. It ended up costing the town $40,000 plus in a new salary with all the benefits that go with it. And why isn't, I mean, I know that Noel's company is doing the research on this. So why isn't there a staff member just going on VRBO and Airbnb, counting up how many listings there are in Northeast Harbor and so forth, and just reporting that? This feels huge when it doesn't need to feel so huge. I also thought this started as a survey, that this was supposed to be a voluntary survey. And now suddenly we're licensing short-term rentals. And also, I feel like this is going to become just a bureaucratic fallout for people who have an infraction and then their license doesn't get renewed in time and they've got to cancel. I don't know, you know, like I said, I feel like this is sort of a gateway ordinance to the town being able to stick their nose into people's private finances. And we're already all paying our taxes and doing the best we can do to keep our you know, our properties. The other question I had is Noel a member of the town of Mount Desert? Because I feel like he's representing a lot of changes in our town, but I thought he lived in Southwest Harbor. So is that something that's an improper question?
I don't think it's improper. I'm definitely not a resident of the town of Mount Desert, but the town has hired me as a consultant to create these ordinances. So these are not I'm creating ordinances on your behalf. I try to say this at every single meeting that we talk about. I say that every time meeting. My job is to reflect what I'm hearing.
But you're on the Luso board as well. And so isn't that?
I am not on the Luso board. I am only a consultant to the Luso board. There's
Oh, I
members of
thought you were the chairman of the Luso board.
you.
Okay, sorry, I got that wrong. I've attended several Luso meetings and your name comes up as chairman.
I am definitely not the chair.
Okay,
No, a couple of questions.
Please. happy to try.
I want to reiterate what was said earlier about maybe there could be some language in the purpose just to touch on the other
Sure.
purpose that we all, or many of us agree
Yep.
is part of this concern. A couple of questions on the occupancy limits. Is that a standard that two extras?
Yeah.
Sleeping on the couch or
It's a
something?
pretty standard in a lot of the models that.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And the other question was, this part on 7B and C, it wasn't clear to me, maybe I'm just not reading it carefully, but if there are complaints, noise, parking, garbage, whatever it is, and the complaints go to the town,
Yep,
and then the suspension would be decided by the Board of Selectmen.
yes.
Would that but it said to consider following public hearing on the basis of the licensee's non-compliance. That would include a lot of complaints.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't quite clear to me, because it seemed like the non-compliance would include things like not having the license or the radon or the fire extinguishers. I wasn't sure that that would constitute a non-compliance,
Well,
but
it
maybe
would-
it's just the way I'm reading it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth clarifying if it's not clear, since the board is the one that's gonna have to administer it. But I believe that it would refer back to the.
I mean, it's
standards in
logical,
section
but I'm
6.
just
Yeah.
not sure it's spelled out.
Yep,
Yeah.
I'll take a look at it.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
No,
Hi.
when you're going through the numbers and you're collecting data, it would be handy for us to have numbers, historical numbers in terms of year-round, what has happened to the year-round rental in the town, not just Northeast Harbor, but the whole town. How many of them are seasonal, how that population of homes has grown or changed over maybe the last 20 years.
Mhm.
The numbers are there. I just, we
I
don't have.
think
them up here.
Derwin has some of those numbers. Didn't you do count them up one time?
Yeah, it's very informal. I went
Yeah.
around and looked at residences that I remembered when I was growing up had been occupied year round and then became seasonal. It was not terribly scientific, but it was probably reasonably accurate. This was in 2017, I think it was, and I came up with 75 at that time, and I'm sure that there's more that have switched over since then. So I do have that
That's in
database.
Northeast Harbor.
Just northeast,
Yeah.
yeah, because I wouldn't have known as much
Right.
at Seal Harbor. I would tell some of the other places.
We have,
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a target
Yeah.
percentage of, what we want to be able to get to.
yeah, I mean, I think this is so if we're just talking about like the availability of housing that is for year-round residents. It's a really, really important time to have that conversation. And there's data we can get, but the crisis is there. There's a lot of things that we need to start to think about to help alleviate that crisis. One thing we should be working on in the comp plan is, trying to understand like how many houses are actually needed. And a lot of other things, but what tools, what barriers are in place right now to prevent more, that are preventing more housing from being built? There's, where should the housing be built? Let's review a lot of those things.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, that, you're absolutely right, but that's an entirely different discussion than trying to protect the existing homes from disappearing from residents' ownership.
Mhm.
And I hear what I believe it was Ms. Aberman said about, the folks that are residents that live in their houses, 300 days a year, 200 days a year, and it is different in my mind, and I think in anybody's mind, but and she's got a point about that. So what are we gonna do? Check on how many, we're gonna go check nightly, how are we gonna do that? I don't know, but I think that is a different animal than somebody who buys a home to run as a business. And we need to do more. And I mean, what do I guess we get to set the fees.
Yeah.
We could set the fees at $10,000 and create a new department to monitor. I mean, but we need to find a way to create a disincentive from homes vanishing before they hardly go on the market from people who want to live in them. And then the last thing, I hope the last thing that I want to say about, there's a lot of places have made the minimum for standalone rentals. This would address some of the concerns of the woman that came and talked about the bonfires and whatnot. It's for standalone weekly or short-term rentals. If we had a minimum stay of 7 nights, that would eliminate quite a lot of the weekend warriors, the riffraff. It really would, and I think that would be something to consider.
Yeah, let anybody from the committee talk about that issue, which we had.
Because I mean, I think that would be a big dent in, with the people coming in for 2 or 3 nights. I know it's challenging with the town, with workforce and getting cleaning crews and whatnot, but that's honestly less my problem.
Go ahead.
Not every,
Jerry, speak up.
I have an issue with calling people that come for 3 days riprap.
Oh,
Some of the.
I didn't say they were, I said it would keep some of them from being.
Well, you could apply this 3 day rentals. And a lot of 3 day rental people are perfectly nice people,
Sure,
and they're not here. And there's no way you can present it by saying 3 days or less and exclude all the bad guys and have them leave the nice people.
this is Donna.
No, something that you said earlier that struck me, and I just would, maybe this isn't the time to elaborate on it, but you said, you indicated that you feel strongly this, as you had before, that this is an island-wide problem and it's severe.
Yes.
We all know that. And you said you've got other ideas, but this is what you're working on now. I'd love to hear some of your other ideas, so maybe at another time, we could
Absolutely.
have that conversation.
I think we should. I think now's a great time to have it. I think I'm trying to figure out, Lincoln said something at one of the meetings that we were at in Soamesville. Might have been Soamesville, that really was resonating, like you can't put the issue off any longer. It's just gonna be
It's an emergency.
an emergency, and we have to figure out tools to do that. So the question is, there's a bunch of tools in the toolkit. What tools does the town of Mount Desert have to deal with it? And there are some things that we should be looking at. For sure. And we'll talk about that, I think re-examining where, and reasserting that your density is gonna be here. Thinking about innovative tools, like we are going to invest as a community in this infrastructure to go here in return for certain things. There's so many factors at play, which I'm not claiming to be the 100% expert on any of this. I just do the research, and I'm working in a lot of different communities who are facing exactly the same issue. And I'm a resident of Mount Desert Island. I have kids who live on Mount Desert Island. I don't think my kids are going to be able to afford living here. And I think me and my wife were probably some of the last people that were able to get in here affordably. We got lucky. And we are also now lucky enough to be able to invest in things that are hopefully going to help our own future. So there's just so many nuances to this conversation, and it's a very emotional conversation, and it should be, but it also needs to be thoughtful and respectful and, logical. And it's, I was reading an article this weekend, I think it was in The Guardian or something like that, and they're talking about Lake Tahoe. It's a great article. I'll forward it to you guys. It's like a snapshot of what we're going to hear about, maybe on a larger scale. But it's going to take them. It's taken us this long to get to this point. If we put the brakes on today, it's still going to take us a lot of time to kind of get back to the point where we were, before. But we've got to start coming up with the tools. And I mean, this is just my sort of soapbox speech about it, but I don't know all the tools. I know some things that we should be working, but I think we're going to start to come up island-wide with a lot more tools that we should be considering. We should definitely continue to have this conversation. Short-term rentals are a piece of that conversation.
Right.
We need to understand what that piece is. We also need to understand what other restrictions that we have that we can't. We're not able to do certain things because of certain rules that are in place to do. Obviously, what do we need to do comprehensively? In some situations, what I'm trying to avoid is let's go back to the data and say, this is where we were, 25 years ago. This is blah, blah, blah. Like, we all know where we were 25 years ago. We all know where we were 10 years ago. Let's be, more proactively thinking about it. But there's things that are happening now that are, just a bunch of interesting things that are already happening that just give you a good understanding of the challenges that are faced when you even try to do, development.
But you gotta have the data.
Yeah, we'll have the data for sure. We'll start from a common point. That's what it is in my mind.
So for some reason, I thought in an earlier iteration of this, that people that were year-round residents here that chose to rent their homes out for a month or two during the summer were exempt.
I don't think we had a version that was of that specificity. I can
Yeah.
check with the lawyers to see if we can even do that, but
Yeah, because I'll tell you, without that kind of exemption, this is gonna be a non-starter.
yep,
Period. It's just what Tracy was saying.
sure.
And when you've got, you could have something, I don't know if you thought of this, but you probably have. But say a situation where you have your target and you have your number of permits that you can issue, and the permits are maxed out, like having a mooring. And someone wants to buy a house and the realtor informs them, well, the way it works here is that I don't know what you're planning on doing with your house. If you're planning on renting it. You have to be aware that there may be a waiting line before you can actually rent that house
For short term.
for short term.
Yep,
Something as basic as that.
yeah, there's no limit to the number of licenses that you can give out right now.
Yeah, well,
But if you did add that.
This is a
that's how-
very first step.
yeah.
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 Well, I was
One of the simple ways to address the disappearance of housing stock to those individuals who would buy up property and they live in some other part of the country and they operate it as a business, is to simply state, if we do end up with a licensing ordinance, to state that if you choose to rent your residential dwelling unit, you must be a resident to do that.
Are you allowed to, is that?
I have to check on that.
It's a good
Well, call
idea
them
if it's
residential
legal.
dwelling units. Otherwise, it's just a miniature hotel that somebody's
That's right.
renting out from away.
Can I speak on that again? I feel like, again, the summer residents, the people who pay 80% of our tax base should not be penalized because they don't live here. But, the next generation of their families does not have the wealth that the previous generations had. And a lot of them rent their houses to cover the cost of paying the staff, who are local people who live on the island, and to pay their taxes and to keep those properties going. I can't say it enough. I feel like this is the wrong direction. I feel like Noel's right. There's a million tools in the toolbox, but we're trying to pass something just to say we're doing something. And I get Lincoln's point that we can't wait, but just like the Main Street project, we just passed something to get something through and to get it going, and it ended up that everybody was unhappy with it. And I feel like you're going to alienate a lot of people with this. I mean, to say you're not a resident or you can't rent to people who stay less than 7 days. I happen just personally to rent my house to families who come for less than 7 days, because guess what? People can't afford to rent on this island for 7 days. So they want to experience Acadia National Park, which is our big feature. And you're telling me now that I can't figure out a way to pay my mortgage when I'm not in my house because you don't like that they only want to pay for 3 days. This feels really like it is not in our purview to be doing this.
Yeah, but Tracy, Rick is not talking about that. He's not talking about you renting out, you as a summer resident, renting out.
Well, he just said, if you're not a resident, you don't live in the town.
No, that's not what he's, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but there are 190, last summer, there were 197 Airbnb units in Mount Desert, okay, in the town of Mount Desert, 197. Mount Desert actually was the smallest of the 4 towns on the island. Southwest Harbor had 330. Back in 2014, there were 0, all right? Now, what we don't know is what percentage of that 197 are investors from out of state who simply bought a house, never having set foot even in Mount Desert, and renting it out as a business. That's a different problem than what you're talking about. What you're talking about is a tradition that we've honored in town for generations. But in the last 5 years, we've seen an explosion. And I can send you all sorts of websites that will cater to this investor crowd. With 700 Airbnbs in Bar Harbor, that's an explosion of a different ilk.
So why don't we just make an ordinance, or if you're going to make an ordinance that says, if you own more than one piece of land and you rent, then you're an investor.
Well,
You can
see,
only
that's-
live in one house at a time. And, because his wording was that if you're not a resident of the town of Mount Desert, which most of the summer residents are not. They're living in Philadelphia, they're living in Massachusetts, they're living in New York. You know, you're basically saying they're no longer residents, but thanks for your 80% of our tax base. We'll do what we want with it.
But that's not what he's saying. That's not what he's
No,
talking.
but I'm extrapolating from that because
No,
I'm
he-
saying you're calling people who don't have a main voting license, a non-resident of Northeast Harbor.
I also have a question, Donna. I might have my hand up too. So,
Donna, go ahead.
oh, okay, thank you. So two things now, actually. The first question was, is there a formal definition of what hosting is? You mentioned you have to host it if you're going to rent it. What, is there a definition of host?
No, it's something called a hosted homestay, and that's the definition. It's a hosted
It sounds like-
homestay.
It seems like we need a definition for what hosting is, because now, you know, how many days do you have to be in your home to be a host? And like you said, but anyway, but and then it got, you know, even further into, and you know, thinking through this, which makes a lot of sense, is do you need to be a full-time resident or not, you know, domiciled 6 months in a day, etc. And then another question, in addition to that, that I really do think we do need a full definition of what hosting is. I think your name is Tracy. You keep saying that 80% of the tax base comes from summer residents. I'm not sure if that's a fact or not. And so I don't want to take that as a
Donna, that is actually something I actually talked to our town assessor, Kyle Vila. I actually asked him that last year, 6 months ago, because I work with another group in town that was actually very interested in what portion of the tax base is paid by the summer residents, and that's what he came back with. So that's not me guessing. That was me asking him specifically.
I would like that clarified, because I'm not sure that that's accurate, actually. I'd like to have that clarified.
Okay, he's the assessor, so.
Yeah, agreed. He is the assessor, but I'm not sure that that's accurate. Thank you.
Well, it depends on definition of summer resident. I have a house in Mount Desert, and I have a house in Greenwich, Connecticut. I spent 6 months in each house. I don't consider myself a summer resident. I don't come in just for between July 4th and Labor Day. That to me is more of a classic summer resident.
Well, there's a full definition of being domiciled, and there's a state requirement of, are you a resident or aren't you? There's no gray line there. It's a fact.
So, okay, I'm gonna close this question. I think we're ready to move a little bit past this.
Thank you, John.
Could I just make a couple of closing thoughts, just to make sure I'm like heading in the right direction for what you want? So I think we have a public hearing on
21st.
21st at 5.
21st, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, as a planner, these are really important conversations to have. It's obvious that there's very much, you know, differences of opinion on how to think about these things, but everybody agrees that there's a need for, you know, more year-round housing opportunities. That's the common thread that I've been able to sort of find throughout that. And so I do think that there's a lot of barriers in the way that we need to identify, and there are a lot of opportunities to try to explore. This is one thing that was asked by this board for us to do. We spent a lot of time doing it. I think it has been actually really helpful, aside from the fact that whether or not you decide to put it as part of the warrant, it's been helpful in generating the passion around the conversation. So we'll put that out there as a good one success of it. But just tell me what direction you want to head in. Should we have some comments at the next meeting? So the way I've been heading with this one is just to try to make it as sort of balanced, not just me, but I think the land use committee has been trying to make it as I want to say balanced, and that may not be the right term, but a balanced licensing ordinance, the best one that they recommend putting forward for the town to consider. But it's really up to the board to decide. And you know, like, we're not ready. Let's try to get it right, but we're going to keep working on the issue. It's not stopping there. I just want to, so I think just to reflect again, I think my job is to kind of have a public hearing, see what comes out of it. We'll come back and have a meeting, and we can decide how you want to move forward.
Great.
that make sense?
Yes.
Does, thank you.
Awesome, thanks. Paul.
Hey, John,
Yes,
one last question. Can I ask you, the board, to consider adding somebody like a teacher or a nurse or an EMT worker onto the Luso committee? So it's more diverse in the representation of people who have different kind of housing needs. Like
We just got-
Margaret Houghton would be a great addition to that committee. I think that the new director of the library, who's looking for year-round homes, I think she would be a great addition.
I think the more the merrier.
yeah, I believe me, we're not gonna be turning anybody away. The difficulty is gonna be convincing Margaret, for example, that she needs to be on another committee.
Okay, well, there are other people.
The two new people.
Joe,
Who are the
Joe
new
Renault
ones?
is a year-round resident,
Who forget, yeah, oh, that's right, we just got to,
Yeah, we
we
did.
approved to, yeah.
Right.
and Alan,
Yeah.
Kennelly
is he year-round?
He's year-round, yeah.
Well, I'm not sure.
Lives in-
I would also, I don't know where you guys are with the membership on the comprehensive planning committee, but that's a really important group.
I asked Jerry Summons if he'd be interested, he'd consider
Yeah,
it.
right,
Good.
He helped like the first.
yeah,
Right.
that's a great important committee. They're a good, well-represented group will be. Excellent.
Who's putting that committee together? Carol?
We were supposed
We
to
are gonna-
advertise it on our webpage.
Yeah, it's being advertised now. We've got a couple of members that are interested.
Remember, we decided to wait.
Get some
We
balance,
wanted to hold off.
because we
Right.
wanted to have somebody representing each part of the community. So we do have some names, but still some more to come.
Yeah, so we're gonna wait until we have a bucket of names and then pick
We'll
who's,
pick them
who's-
all at once.
and who's gonna be in charge of picking those names.
We are.
Yeah.
You are.
boy.
We will be.
Thanks, Noel.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right,
Thank you.
good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Noel.
Are we on six and got another business?
No, we're
No.
still in.
No,
we're at
LY ordinance, yes.
So the ordinances that follow, like the alewife is standard every year, but I just put it on the list because it is an ordinance.
Yeah.
And then the proposed harbor ordinance was submitted to me by John Lemoyne. From the harbor committee, and so hopefully his language or whatever is self-explanatory. That's what they would like to put on the warrant.
I would suggest that the in that warrant, proposed warrant for the harbor ordinance, under resident, it identifies dwelling within the town of Mount Desert for more than 180 days. I was looking at Maine revised statutes today, and they have upped that to 183 days. We are capable of making ordinances that are more restrictive than state statute, but we can't do one that is less restrictive. So we may want to change that to 183 days.
Exactly. Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay,
Sounds right.
I'm a member of the harbor committee, by the way.
who's speaking?
Donna?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, we put 181 because that was what John came up with, was the state ordinance that we have to be at or more restrictive of. But thanks for pointing that out. If it's a 183, then of course that's necessary. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then the following, the sunset clause removal, if you recall, we had a referendum for the charter last year, eliminating the sunset clause. So I am going through the ordinances, identifying the ones that have the sunset clause still. And these represent most of the ones that are coming up in the next year or two. With the sunset clause expiring. So I thought it would be good to take care of these and get them off of the expiration list.
Good.
Before they expire.
none of these are changing. We're just making sure that we don't have to reinvent them again when
That's
they
right.
run out of time.
Yep.
But we can always, if something came up that we wanted to alter one of them, we could
Oh,
at
yeah.
a later date.
Yeah.
That's what I just clarification. Yeah,
Okay, so we just want to remove the sunset.
yeah,
Yeah,
for now.
That's
yeah.
what all those are.
Yeah.
So tonight, we're just voting on the green.
I don't think we're voting at
Yes,
all.
you can vote on green or not, but the green are what I think from our meetings and whatnot are ready to go.
Okay, so do we need to make a motion to remove the sunset clause here?
Well, that would be.
We're not down to the drafts.
No, we're
Putting
not.
them actually on the town meeting, that don't you?
Yeah, it's on the town meeting, but they are in the warrant.
Yeah.
So you can vote as you go through the warrant, whether or not you want to recommend passage
Okay.
or not.
Can we go back to mooring registration for just a moment? I have a question that, maybe Donna, you could clarify for me, on mooring registration and permit. It says all other tidal waters, that includes, I'm sure, both shores of Somme Sound, around the point, over near Bartlett's Landing. Are there fees associated with the permit, and registration for the harbor master? And if so, when a person registers their mooring, what services will they be receiving or can count on from the harbor master's office? Should they do that?
Yeah, yes, there are fees, and the services are different in different areas, like Bartlett's has way less services than Northeast Harbor, for example.
Right. And private moorings in Somme Sound are much different than those in Northeast Harbor or in Somes Harbor or at Bartlett's Landing.
Right, the services are different, so services would be different at all different ones, and I don't know if there would be a different fee for those.
Okay, is that something that would be willing to ask the harbor committee about?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you very much.
All right, so you want to go through some of these greenies?
Sure.
All right. Okay, Article 4. Shall an ordinance dated May 2nd in entitled Town of Mount Desert Alewife ordinance be enacted?
Yeah.
Move to recommend passage.
Second,
All in favor? Article 5, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 entitled Amendments to the Town of Mount Desert Harbor Ordinance be enacted?
You wanted to change that to 183 days. So you wanted to amend that.
so we need to wait on that.
We'll need to wait.
Yeah.
Article 6, so shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Ordinance Regulating the Building and Street Numbering in the Town of Mount Desert be enacted?
That's removing the sunset.
Okay, because we're paving over and we're just enacting. Yeah.
Move recommendation.
Second,
All in favor? Article 7, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Amendments to the Town of Mount Desert Dog Ordinance be enacted?
Move to recommend passage.
Second,
All in favor? Article 8, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Amendments to the Town of Mount Desert Harbor Ordinance be enacted?
That's for the sunset only, that part.
move recommendation.
second,
All in favor? Article 9, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Town of Mount Desert Ordinance limiting motor vehicle access to great ponds be enacted?
That sounds like-
move recommendation,
Second.
All in favor? Article 10, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Town of Mount Desert no swimming ordinance be enacted?
move recommendation,
Second,
All in favor? Article 11, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Amendments to the Town of Mount Desert Public Road Acceptance Ordinance be enacted?
Move it.
second,
All in favor? Article 12, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Rural Wastewater Treatment Support Program Ordinance of the Town of Mount Desert be enacted?
move recommendation,
Second.
All in favor? Article 13, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Solid Waste Ordinance of the Town of Mount Desert be enacted?
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 14, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Town of Mount Desert Use of Public Places Ordinance be enacted?
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 15, shall an ordinance dated May 2nd, 2023 and entitled Amendments to the Land Use Zoning Ordinance regarding lots within the village commercial district in the village of Northeast Harbor be enacted as set forth below?
You guys don't have to do these. These
Oh,
are
right,
planning
this is,
board.
Okay.
that's right.
Planning board, that's right.
Planning,
Okay.
planning,
Yeah,
planning.
good.
So,
Is that it for us? or-
15, 16, 17.
I just, excuse me, this is Donna. I just spoke with, I tried to reach John, but he's not picking up. But I did reach Rick Savage, who's the chairman of the committee, and he's going to be zooming in now, so he can answer your question.
oh, great.
Okay.
I think Article 26 is the next one.
Okay. Article,
Rick is gonna.
Yeah.
okay, Article 26, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to accept conditional gifts, unconditional gifts, equipment, receipts from sale of fire equipment, or funds on behalf of the municipal fire department. It is understood that any funds received will be placed in the fire equipment reserve fund.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 27, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to lease a portion of the so-called visitor center of Northeast Harbor Marina to the ticket booth operators for a term of 1 year, beginning July 1, 2023.
Move recommendation.
Second.
And all in favor? Article 28. See if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to lease a portion of the so-called visitor center at the Northeast Harbor Marina to the Mount Desert Chamber of Commerce for a term of 1 year.
Redundant, isn't it?
Yes, it does.
I think we've already.
What do you mean?
Well,
No,
you've
no,
got the ticket.
you
No,
got
we got
ticket
the ticket,
booth.
and then we got the chamber, two different things.
Okay, so Article 28 is to the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah,
Move recommendation.
second.
All in favor? Article 30. See if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into a 10-year lease with the town of Cranberry Isles for 123 parking spaces in the town office municipal parking lot, under the terms and conditions the board deems advisable.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 37, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to authorize the select board to accept and expend on behalf of the town additional state, federal, and other funds received during the fiscal year 2023-24 for town purposes, provided that such additional funds do not require expenditure of local funds not previously appropriated.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 38, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to approve July 1 each year as the date on which all taxes shall be due and payable, providing that all unpaid taxes of each year shall be charged interest at an annual rate of 8% per year.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 39, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to authorize the tax collector to enter into a standard tax fund agreement with taxpayers whereby the taxpayer agrees to pay specified monthly payments to the town based on the taxpayer's estimated and actual tax obligation for current year property taxes, real estate, and or personal. 2, the town agrees to waive interest on timely payments. 3, the town authorizes the tax collector to accept payment of taxes prior to commitment of taxes. 4, the agreement automatically terminates if 2 consecutive payments are missed, and so forth.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Do you need a moment to breathe?
He's just clattering right along.
Article 40, to see if the town will vote to authorize the tax collector to accept prepayment of property taxes not yet committed, not to exceed the estimated amount to be committed in the subsequent year, with no interest to be paid on same.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 41, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to set the interest rate to be paid by the town for abated taxes that have been paid at the rate of 4% per year.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 42, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to authorize expenditures to pay any tax abatements granted by the assessor, board of assessment review, or select board, together with any interest due thereon from the town during the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2023.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 43, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert would vote to authorize the select board to dispose by public bid of town-owned property other than real property with value of $30,000 or less.
I'll make one quick note.
Yes.
Actually, since 1998, I believe this has been 10,000.
Yeah.
And that 30,000 metric is based on 26 years at a little bit less than 4.5%. Open to discussing if you guys want that going up or down. But I think that addresses the past inflationary concerns as well as, provides a usable number. But I just wanted to make it clear that did change.
Thank you, Jake. Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? That's fine.
I know.
Article 44, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to authorize the select board to sell at public auction or by advertised sealed bid and to convey titles obtained under tax deeds and under deeds of conveyance to the inhabitants of the town, any land and or buildings, including trailers, in lieu of payment of taxes, except that the selectmen have the power to authorize redemption. Motion.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 45, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to authorize the select board to contract for services in amounts not to exceed appropriation for same under such terms and conditions as it deems advisable.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 47. See,
Chairman,
yes.
We're gonna make a recommendation to change on Article 47. We're gonna recommend that be increased to 600,000.
So we'll just leave it alone.
Because we got EDF audit from the auditors, and we checked with them, so we feel that we can make that change.
Okay.
That should be read.
So we can't vote this now.
So we're not going to vote this thing, are we?
Oh, you can vote that now.
You can vote it with an amended amount of 600,000.
Okay,
Yeah, I
so,
believe that change came in after I'd already put this together.
okay, Article 47, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to transfer $500,000, $600,000 from the undesignated fund balance account 100-38300 to reduce the 2023-24 tax commitment.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Good.
Yeah.
Article 48, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and or appropriate as revenue through excise taxes. Is this,
This is what this is basically is that revenue sheet that I gave you.
Yes.
Minus the 500,000 or 600,000 now, that you would be doing for EDF.
So this would be 2065,157.
Yeah, and you would add the 600,000 on the other warrant article,
Okay.
which you've already done.
okay, so Article 48,
Move recommendation.
Second.
all in favor? Article 52, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to ratify the overdraft that occurred in debt service for the year ended June 30, 2022 in the amount of $2,381.09.
Move recommendation.
Second.
Yeah, okay.
Did I have a second? All in favor?
Just took a minute to digest that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Donna back about the Harbor Committee. So John is on vacation and we have a meeting tomorrow night. So I reached Rick and he was unable to zoom in, so we had a problem with a link or whatever. So he said, is it okay for you to send him or John an email so that we can address it tomorrow and then get right back to you on it?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
Thanks.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't help you better.
That's all
All
right.
right, thank you. Article 54, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 200 through 221, general government, governing body, municipal management, town clerk, registrar, elections, planning board, finance, and so forth. Select board recommends $1,880,871.
Move recommendation.
Second,
All in favor? Article 55, to see what some the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 300 general assistance. The select board recommends $5,000.
Move recommendation.
second,
All in favor? Article 56, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 350 rural wastewater support. Select board recommends $222,066.
move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 57, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 406 streetlights for the 2023-24 town budget. Select board recommends $11,250.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 58, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 401, 405, and 407, and 408, public safety, police, shellfish, animal control, and communications. Police, the select board recommends $1,631,156.
Move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Can I ask a question? Did we have a discussion last year about putting in the prior year's amounts on the warrant so people would know that? I remember something about a discussion like that.
It was brought up last year. There was some actual direction, I think, decided on it. The concern that went along with that was that I think the elementary school provides the prior year number, but I think we provide a little bit more breakdown in the actual article of, the segments that make up that funding. And so I think there was a concern that it was just going to get busier and busier if we kept those segments and then also had the prior year funding amount. That being said, we can
It could be-
amend it if that's what the select board wants.
It could be in an appendix, couldn't it? I mean, wouldn't it, it could be.
It is shown.
It is,
in
so
the
it
budget.
shows in
It's
the
shown in the
Yeah, they
appendix.
could, but I mean, that's the thing is that most people aren't gonna weed through the budget itself, but I personally, I guess it seems like it could answer a lot of questions for people without them having to ask. But it's just, again, I think it would look nice if they could see that the police budget was $1,166,478 this year, and last year it was $1,646,000. It would be like, oh, it's a huge budget, but it's only up 20,000 kind of thing.
I think that could go either way.
I agree, but anyway,
Yeah.
We'll do it whatever you want.
It could be a talking point that could land us in the earlier hours of the
yeah,
following morning.
maybe. And again,
Yeah.
We're several nights.
it's something I would recommend personally, but we can discuss it further again another time.
Thank you.
Okay, Article 59, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 403, 404, and 409, public safety. That is fire department, hydrants, and emergency management. Select board recommends the figure of $2,541,834.
I move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor? Article 60, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 501, 515, 520, and 525 Public Works. The select board recommends $3,122,149.
Move recommendation.
Second,
All in favor? Article 61, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for the Department 505, 506, which is sewers, sewer treatment. Select board recommends $1,209,765.
Move recommendation.
second,
All in favor? Article 62, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 605 Recreation, Public Pool Utilities and Maintenance for the 23-24 town budget. The select board recommends $5,900.
Move recommendation.
Second,
All in favor? Article 63, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 701 Economic Community Development for the 23-24 town budget. The select board recommends $10,000.
Move recommendation.
second,
All in favor? Article 65, to see what some of the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to raise and appropriate for Department 991 Capital Improvement Plan transfers. Select board recommends $1,209,234.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
We're gonna bring this back with a lower number. We,
Okay.
Revisited it, found a few areas that we think we can cut without,
Okay,
creating issues.
great. So we'll table that for now. Article 67, to see if the inhabitants of the town of Mount Desert will vote to ratify the select board's approval of the Marina Proprietary Fund budget.
move recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
See, I think you want to move ratification.
I'll move
Ratification. Yes. Second, and all in favor? Right.
Yeah.
I would take a motion to adjourn.
Oh, wait. Under other, I put a memo out on there. I just need some direction.
Oh, yeah.
from the board.
Okay, so two things. I will admit, I'm one of the late filers of this. For windows for the Otter Street Church, but I didn't see it, went to my trash, I don't know. Anyway, I was a week late. So you can just pull that. Okay, we're not gonna. We'll just put towels over the windows. So here you have a space here that says financial report. So you got to ask yourself, what is a financial report? It's not a Form 990. What do you want with that?
The general financial health of the organization.
Okay, so that's different than a financial report.
It's different than a financial statement, that's for sure,
Yeah,
but it's definitely a report.
okay, so maybe we should have a form that has places for people to fill in, so it's very clear and very standard across the board. Because you're gonna get from village improvement societies, your little postcard 990 things that aren't gonna tell you anything. Okay,
And the original intent, as I understood it, was to not be burdensome in this request.
Right.
And basically whatever the organization was already producing would likely be sufficient
yeah,
to meet that, And so, and in the few cases where, a 990 was not applicable to the organization, there have been people that have reached out asking for a little bit of guidance on it, and so far it seems to have worked pretty well. That being said, if the purpose is to gather data, how useful that data is going to be, I guess, determined in the long run by you all when you get that data as to whether you find it useful.
it would be, I can guarantee you without even looking at it, that if it's not all at least the same flavor, it's gonna be very complicated.
Yeah, that is.
Okay, so those forms should be
That's what it is.
So
simple, direct, income, revenue.
it's,
But it's attached to most recent financial
That's it.
report.
I think that's what people have been providing if they.
Yeah,
I think it's the wording on number 7. In number 7, it says organization annual financial report. I think it would be a summary of your organization's annual financial activity would be sufficient, not so, but anyway, isn't this is already moved for this year anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what are we? How do
Everyone's
you
direction.
want clarification on how to handle the late requests?
I just say no.
I say follow the policy.
Follow the
Yeah.
policy, absolutely.
I agree too.
Yep, no exceptions.
Thank you.
And maybe we could work on some sort of form that would clarify for people what kind of financial information they need to give us.
Yeah, it says attach in there. It says attached
Yeah.
by name, but maybe that could be spelled out a little.
Yeah, we're just looking at what do they go through every year and what do they take in and where does it
Yeah.
come from? We're
Yeah.
looking for a rough,
Mhm.
that's it.
Good.
So we move into
Move
adjournment.
Adjourn.
All in favor, yay. Aye.
Everybody at once. Seconded by everybody.
Yeah. All right,
Oh, you got stuff for me to sign there?
Yes, I
Oh, you
do.
do?
you
Well,
do.
for,
Not for
well,
you guys.
no, for me, because I wasn't here, because I was
Just-
zooming in with my
Just for the.